India's longest-running show on startups and entrepreneurship, Young Turks turns 21, and we are back with a brand new season of Voices from the Valley. This season, we bring you stories from the front line of what's being called the biggest technological innovation of our times, generative AI. In this edition of Voices from the Valley, we hear from Celesta Capital and two of its portfolio founders who are leveraging AI in ways never imagined before. We put the spotlight on Prellis and Recogni. The brainchild of an immunologist and biophysicist Melanie Matthew, Prellis is pioneering bioconvergence, which is the coming together of biology and deep tech. Prellis is striving to 3D print human organs such as liver and kidney and thus enable transplants without waitlists. Externalized human immune system is another of Dr. Matthew's breakthroughs, which recreates the human immune system in a petri dish. Investor Celesta Capital says this technology can transform the drug discovery process and become the gold standard in the pharmaceutical industry. Deals have been signed with at least 5 drug companies, including Sanofi and Bristol-Myers Squibb. Moving from solving problems that are truly human to those of machines, Recogni is making vehicles safer, especially the self-driving ones. Founded in 2017, the beating heart of Recogni is its AI chip, which can process high-resolution images of objects up to 1,000 meters in real time. The super chip can process an image to its last pixel in less than 10 milliseconds, which provides ample reaction time for an autonomous car to navigate safely. No wonder Recogni also runs advanced driver assistance systems for a regular car. The leaders of the automobile world have taken notice. BMW and Toyota are investors in Recogni.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Young Turks. I'm Shereen Bhan. As you know, the show has turned 21, and as we usually do, we're back here in the Valley to do our annual trek to gauge what sentiment and mood looks like here and what the opportunities for the India-US startup corridor could potentially be. Joining me today are a group of investors and their portfolio company founders. Let me give you a little bit of an insight into what Celesta Capital does. Founded in 2013, over $1 billion of assets under management, 90 companies invested in so far, 27 exits, 13 Indian startups, including one that's all set to IPO, IdeaForge. Nick, Sriram, Mike and Marc, many thanks for joining us here on this special edition of Young Turks. So let's get started. And Nick, I'll start by talking to you because our last conversation happened a few months ago and you were extremely bullish and confident about India. In fact, you said you want to double down on your India investments. What does the story look like today?
Well, we continue to be very excited about India, and it's good to see we're not the only ones that are excited. Lots of other people seem to be coming in and focusing on the opportunities in India. And, you know, the IdeaForge story, along with our first exit there, which was a company called Aura Semiconductor, exemplify the opportunities that we see in India.
You know, you talked about IdeaForge, and it is, of course, got the clearance now as far as its IPO is concerned. But the larger drone story in India, and this is being pegged as one of the opportunities that the Indian government is pushing. We've seen a production-linked incentive scheme being launched by the government specifically for the drone space. It's a small one, but nevertheless, it's on the table. What do you make of the strength of the India drone opportunity today?
Well, we think it's very strong. When we made the investment in IdeaForge 6 years ago, we had looked at several drone companies in North America and other geographies, and we did not make any of those investments.
Why not?
Because we felt the market was, at that time, the market had become somewhat crowded. It was hard to differentiate. It was hard to figure out who was likely to win and everybody had a slight competitive advantage, but it was hard to make a bet at that time. It was a little bit mature in terms from an investment perspective. But when we looked at IdeaForge, we felt that the opportunity here was the fact that the Indian requirements were very different from everywhere else. You look at the Indian terrain and some of the other challenges that you face in India. We thought that the successful drone company in India would have to be a local company that understood the Indian dynamics. And so we made that bet. And we thought that the founding team were very smart. They were very inexperienced, but we thought that what they brought was so powerful that the rest could be learned. And so I often tease them that the first 3 years was an investment in their educational fund. and it worked out fantastically. I mean, they've grown into some very good entrepreneurs, very good executives, and we're very excited about it. But the uniqueness of the Indian opportunity was the one that drove us to make this investment. We felt it would be very difficult for one of these established companies to come in and be able to beat a local company because of the unique dynamics of the Indian
Well, speaking of the unique dynamics of the India opportunity, Sriram, let's talk about the other big opportunity that is being put on the table, and that is the semiconductor opportunity. And, you talked about your first India investment, which happened to be in a firm, in a fabless design firm, and an exit as well. How are you reading this? You're also a member of the ISM, the government set up a board that's going to be looking at semiconductor investments in India. How do you read this opportunity today?
Well, as you know, India has had this tremendous history of just amazing talent in software for the longest time. For decades, India has been known as the sort of the software infrastructure for the rest of the world. And now I think there's a clear move in the direction towards deep technology focused around semiconductors, as we talked about in manufacturing or in drones or other, higher layers of the stack, if you will. But the timing of the Indian government's focus in semiconductor, not just in the factories or the fabs for manufacturing, but also in the fabless area, is profoundly significant, especially if you take into account sort of the global sort of geopolitical issues that we're all faced with in terms of supply chain, in terms of new sort of applications in the generative AI space. All of these areas bode very well for the Indian opportunity and the Indian ecosystem. And we see tremendous number of companies that are actually leveraging that. And we're glad to be part of, backing, many of them, and we hope to be doing a lot more of that.
Mm-hmm. Specifically the India-US partnership, there is an MOU now for the semiconductor space, but there's also a large program that the US is rolling out, to try and get chips manufactured here in the US, courtesy the CHIPS Act, which is a significant incentive program.
Yeah.
What are the potential areas of partnership that you believe both sides need to focus on as we move forward?
Well, listen, I think the overall market is becoming hugely important for every consumer, application, devices, all of the things that we use and take for granted. Starting from washing machine to cars to refrigerators to telephones and all of these. And so for the longest time, the semiconductor industry was pretty diverse, but over the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's become very concentrated with very few suppliers or very few manufacturing capabilities that exist in the world. And as we all know, TSMC and Taiwan do an amazing job. And a lot of the countries and the governments are actually starting to realize that they need to actually invest in domestic manufacturing, domestic sort of capabilities, because if not for anything else, forget the supply chain issues that we all faced in the last 18 months or so. It's just a core national security initiative. And rightfully so, the U.S. government, was able to pass the CHIPS Act. And I see that sort of happening in every geography. And I think India also will probably have to attract more people to actually start new companies in the fabless area. And there's tremendous talent, as I mentioned. And there are lots of investors, including Celesta, that are actually looking at that and saying, how do we actually help create that ecosystem to the actual benefit of the local markets?
Yeah.
And increasingly, those companies actually are able to build products for broader use. And it's good for everybody. It just sort of broadens the available pie for everybody and, protects the domestic objectives as well.
Yeah, and we've at least seen one announcement being made here, and that is the announcement of KRON to invest over $2 billion in India as part of this partnership that we were talking about. But Nick, semiconductors, of course, a big space, drones, another area that Celesta is betting on. But you're also betting on bioconvergence, and that brings us to why Mike is here on this panel here this morning. So what's that bet about?
Well, we believe that if you can combine the capabilities and advancements in high tech into the biotech space, that we have an opportunity to significantly increase the pace of development in biotech. we think we have an opportunity to reduce the cost of development and to reduce the cost of diagnostics and other types of capabilities. So we think that this intersection of high-tech and biotech creates an opportunity to transform a lot of what we see happening in biotech and be able to develop products that are beneficial to a larger percentage of the global population.
Mm-hmm. So what's the problem that Prellis is hoping to solve, Mike?
So today, about 70% of medicines come out of something called biologics, which are large molecules, not the normal small molecules like aspirin you take. And one of the major ways you get those are antibodies. So there's natural things you make. If you get a disease, you make an antibody to it. Well, those have been turned into medicines. And right now, you have to use a mouse with a human immune system. It's a very long, complicated process. So we have a process that comes out of human blood, where we actually make lymph nodes, which are the little organs inside people that make these antibodies, and we can print them. So that's the high
3D
tech.
printing. That's the high tech.
It's the part of the high tech is that we can print these lymph nodes, and then we can ask it to make antibodies to what we want. And then on the back end, we're using the generative AI revolution to improve them. So the biology gives us a first generation that's quite good, and then the new generative AI tools make them much better and make them much more drug-like. And so we believe that combination could reduce the cost of making the antibody as much as tenfold. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you could go after targets you couldn't go after before and combinations you couldn't. And it should also lower the cost of medicines across the board.
Okay, so the time to market, you believe, is going to be significantly cut down on account of this, as well as affordability. So, are you partnering with pharmaceutical companies? I know that you have a deal going with BMS, for instance. What does the future look like for a company like yours?
So, yes, because almost every single approach that you hear about requires the ability to bind specifically biologically. So whatever a company wants to do, a big pharma company, they often need a step that this happens. So yeah, I think it is a future of partnerships. And we believe over time this will completely displace the current ways that all these binders are made. And therefore it will infiltrate cell therapies, gene therapies, the current antibody therapies, and just become a way that this is done much better, much cheaper, much faster, and generally making higher quality products.
Do you see an opportunity for India to play a role in your plans? Because it is the pharmacy of the world, at least as far as the generic space is concerned. How do you see India fitting into this plan, if at all?
So India is amazing because of its ability to manufacture. Obviously, in the small molecule space, it's been an absolute leader. And I think over time, you'll see these technologies going everywhere. And India's capability to make medicines, its experience in making medicines at scale, I think this will fit right into it and allow India to potentially continue that pharmacy of the world and potentially travel up market to the really higher end applications, which are hard because you need a lot of technologies to come together. And if this makes one of the key technologies more accessible, then it's easier for a country like India to say, well, we don't have to do all the things that you've been doing for 100 years. We're going to leapfrog right to the next generation.
Well, speaking of leapfrogging, Marc, let's talk about the technology that you're focused on at Recogni, and that really has more to do with the automotive space and AI and bringing the two together. So what's the problem that you're hoping to solve?
Yeah, so the problem we're trying to solve is how do you make autonomous driving safe and sustainable? So we really are trying to enable autonomous driving. So the difficulty there is you have all the sensors around the vehicle, and you have to be able to look at the environment around the vehicle and to be able to understand what context you're in. You have to sense vehicles, you have to sense pedestrians, you have to sense lane lines, and we're moving to more and more sensors, and those more sensors require much more compute than is available today. And so that's really needed for safety, to see around the vehicle, to understand your where you are so you can make that safe driving decision. But when you add that compute to the vehicle, you also are adding a lot of power into the vehicle, power requirements. So now if we're moving to electrified vehicles and autonomous vehicles, for electrification, if you're putting these autonomous systems on vehicles now, and they're taking the range down of the electric vehicle, that's a big problem. So we are solving the problem of coming up with more compute to make it safer, but also very low power so we can enable sustainability and enable electrified vehicles.
So where are we as far as self-driving cars are concerned?
Sure.
I mean, level 4, how far out do you believe that that scenario is going to be? And I don't even want to imagine that in India at any point soon. But, where are we today in terms of acceptance, in terms of adoption?
I think level 4 is still a ways out. There's a lot of corner cases and use cases that need to be solved, and part of that is getting the right sensor sets on the vehicles to be able to understand the environment and then the training of those vehicles. So we're still a ways away. The big part of the market is going to be these level 2 plus and level 3 systems. And so level 2 plus systems are where you have your hands off and your feet off, but your eyes are on the road. And so that's going to be a large portion of the market. And then they'll slowly move into level 3 systems, and some of those systems are available today. And for level 3 systems, you can start taking your eyes off the road. So you can imagine you're in a traffic jam, and to be able to now do something different and take your eyes off the road in a traffic jam. And I think, that's definitely this first use case that's coming out for level 3.
I want to understand from you, where are we today in light of the fact that interest rates continue to move higher, that we have now seen here in the Valley, though nobody's talking about it anymore, what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. Valuations have seen a significant markdown. There are questions on whether zombie companies, as we've known them to exist through the era of easy money, will continue or not. How are you reading the ecosystem?
Well, as one of my dear friends used to say, a recession or a downturn is a bad thing to waste, because these are the times when the good companies really separate themselves from the rest, and the strong ones get stronger and the weak ones die. And it's sort of a natural process of evolution in the financial system, which I think is very healthy. I think there was a period when there was too much hype, and there's lots of people that were actually putting a lot of money into concepts and not really underlying strong businesses. But more importantly, if you take a company like Recogni, as they're building the core technology, which is fundamental innovation in autonomous driving, what you find is that the core technology can be applied to a bunch of other segments as well. Could be in drones with cameras for image sensing, could be for, delivery of a robot for, in a self-driving mode for delivering your pizza. So there are a number of areas where the same technology could be applied. And the core building block of that is this notion of building a math system-based AI architecture that can be applied. So when you look at companies like that have great potential, then those companies end up thriving despite the downturn, because it's quite natural for certain segments of the market to not grow as fast or as quickly as you would expect, but there are other applications. So this whole large language model, application for generative AI has happened in the last 6 months. But you have to recognize that the technologies that went into that have been in development for 10, 15 years. So in a way, these downturns are perfect times for the strong companies to get very focused, really, look at exploiting the adjacent markets. And we as investors are all about hedging risk. So as much as we want the Prellis and the Recogni to succeed, we want to really figure out how they can survive when the environment gets dry, when the capital is not available at the rates that you would expect. And so if they have adjacent market applications, then they thrive. And so it's really about, balancing all of that, which I think is the perfect time for now, I think.
You spoke about generative AI, and let me get Marc and Mike to get in on this, because you're right. The last 6 months, that's all one has heard of, is the opportunity, the potential of generative AI, as well as the existential threat on account of it. Mike, let me start by asking you, today governments, policymakers, companies, everyone is grappling with, what do you regulate? Who do you regulate? Can it be regulated or not? I want to understand from you. Are you in the doomsday camp, or do you believe that, there's more hype than necessary today?
So I think AI, the generative AI, is amazing. And again, we use similar technology, the large language models, to improve protein structures, right? Which is actually a use case that came maybe a year or two before the hype of the last 6 months around written text. So I'm very positive on it because in very specific use cases, it's amazing technology. What it's going to do to society, at this point, I'm a little unclear, but I don't think we have any choice but to move forward decisively and to take advantage of these technologies because their power is undeniable.
The power is undeniable. Can you slow it down? How do you slow it down? Who slows it down? I think that's the question today, Marc.
I don't know if there is a need to really slow it down. I think there is going to be some regulations that are going to come out in the generative AI space, and they might different by regions and by country. But it's something that's here now. The genie's a bit out of the bottle, and it's going to have a big impact on all areas of efficiency and development. And so these multimodal generative AI, where you're moving now, putting a text input and getting a video output, or a text input and getting a presentation out, all of that generative AI you'll see in all of the applications going forward.
Is there a lot of FOMO currently in this space as far as the investor community is concerned? Does everybody want to ride the generative AI bus?
Well, there's definitely a lot of FOMO in the space, in the AI space in general. I mean, Gen AI, more so in the last few months. But I think if you go around the valley, almost everybody either has some kind of AI processor, AI-enabled investment in their portfolio, and if they don't, they're looking hard to add them. But I think some of us who have been involved in the space for a longer time, we are less concerned about some of the hype, although we do admit that there are challenges that need to be addressed. And
specifically, which ones are you most worried about?
But I'm worried about some of the ethical ones. But even on the basic use cases, I'm concerned about just understanding the logic behind recommendations. So when you use an engine to make recommendations, you have to think about it. If I was talking to someone, I was to ask you a question, and you make a recommendation, I would ask you, why do you think so? You would explain to me your logic, and I would determine from that logic whether or not I want to accept your recommendation. When you don't have the ability to query, and something is giving you recommendations and you're just adopting them, I think there are challenges associated with that. But I think there are technological solutions in play that would help to address some of these things. So I think, whenever there is new breakthrough technologies, there are always challenges. And we know from history that many new breakthrough technologies also bring risk, because there are bad actors who use technologies for bad purposes. And so there are always these things you have to deal with. But I do agree that we have to address them, but I don't necessarily believe that we have to slow down.
Yeah, and you're right in pointing out that every big tech breakthrough, transformational breakthrough, does come with its own associated risks and challenges. But Sriram, in the context of the challenges that we speak of, and I think the big concern really for countries like India with a large young population is the job displacement aspect. And this is not a new threat linked to the power of technology. But how do you see that playing out as we move more and more into an AI-dominated world?
Well, this is, by the way, this is not the first time the industry or the country would have faced something like this, because there's a natural progression of skills enhancement. And if you sort of think about, the medical transcription segment, which, decades ago was actually done by somebody who was actually, getting the doctor's notes and transcribing it, you don't do that anymore, because that skill has evolved. And now people have naturally sort of adopted a very new technology to actually achieve the same purpose. I think that's the same thing that will happen here. Whether it's you're looking at the legal area, whether you're looking at retail, whether you're looking at transportation, any of these areas, the core value that is being delivered by, a person will have to enhance over time with the adoption of new technology. So those skills will get re-enhanced, and, they'll be retrained. So as much as there's all this hype around job displacement, I think if you just look at history, people evolve to new skills. And I think we expect the same thing to happen here. And there are, like for instance, as, Nick mentioned, AI ethics. My parents or my grandparents would have not even put those two words together, let alone know what AI meant. Now you actually can go to a university and do a course on what are the fundamental issues around AI ethics. How do you ensure bias in the programming of the large language models doesn't create a problem for the exact reason that Nick was talking about? So how do you ensure that you can actually explain the analysis? These are all areas and skills that people have not been trained on yet. So as much as there will be some displacement, there'll be new opportunities for people to get trained and, participate in the labor market, which is exactly what will happen. Now, whether this happens at a time frame where the replacement rate is equal to the, to the rate of the loss, that's to be seen. But in general, I think this is a hugely positive thing, especially if you take, the medical sciences. Lots of positive, life-saving technologies can happen, which is a big positive.
And Mike was just talking about that. But, speaking of skills, and let me ask the two of you as founders, it is a challenging environment today. It is volatile. It's uncertain. Easy money is no longer a consideration on the table. As founders, how do you navigate through these sort of uncertain times? Is there anything that you're doing differently? What is the current playbook for you?
Well, capital discipline. So, extending your runway intelligently, and then delivering results. I mean, at the end of the day, I have no doubt that if we can deliver results, there is plenty of money out there in the world, both from large pharmaceutical companies that would like the technology and from investors that would like to participate. But I don't think just hyping it will get it done in this environment. 21 was a different world. Maybe you could just talk and someone would give you money, but now I think you have to deliver results.
You've got to deliver results, Marc.
Absolutely. I would echo a lot of those same sentiments. I mean, for us personally, going into our next round of funding, we were very fiscally disciplined, and we're very, we're not going to hire or bring on staff until we got into that next round of funding. And so, but it's all about execution. You have to show the progress, you have to show your fit into the market, and you have to have that pull from the market. And so being able to show that has also been able to get us a lot of momentum then going into our next round of funding, and to actually secure that funding and then get us on that growth trajectory and to start filling out and adding teams to fuel that growth.
About the problems of excess that we saw, which led to the kind of exuberance in valuations, etc. And we're seeing that correction play itself out. India's most valued startup, the edtech startup Byju's, the auditor is resigning, board members have resigned. There's, of course, challenges there in terms of, the financials being put out, etc. But this is a large case, but there are other similar sort of issues that have cropped up in the Indian startup ecosystem in the recent past. Does it worry you today, especially around areas of governance?
There's always a concern of governance. As an investor, we've seen cases where, the challenges associated with poor attention to governance. I think over the last few years, the issue has been in many cases that people have treated growth and profitability as mutually exclusive. And we've seen people focus so much on trying to grow or take market share that they didn't pay attention to almost anything else. The kind of backgrounds we've come from, we know that growth and profitability can work together, and we think there's nothing wrong with profitable growth. And it's very hard to change disciplines in a company as you build it. If you take a startup, and in the early stages of the startup, you say, don't pay attention to certain things, just focus on market share gains and those things. It's very difficult at some point to just turn around and say, okay, now ignore all of that and go pay
Which
attention.
Is what's happening now.
That's exactly
what's happening now.
That's exactly what's happening. And in the companies in which we've invested, we have not taken that approach. We've always taken the approach that you have to be disciplined, you have to be fiscally responsible, and that growth is important, but profitable growth is important. And some of that might come from the background that, some of us like Michael and myself come from a contract manufacturing background where every penny mattered.
Yes,
I remember
because the margins were so thin.
Oh yeah, we used to quote some products to 3 decimal places, like $28.001.
Well, that's a completely different era, Nick. But Sriram, what would be the 3 or 4 big bets outside of the sectors that we just spoke of that you would like to make?
Well, I'm going to tell you that when these companies go public, that we're taking those bets on, and then you can do a profile on them. But that said, I think we've talked about, Celesta has been in India for a long time. We've had, a dozen companies or so now, and then we expect that to increase. We will continue to focus on this corridor, for all the reasons we've discussed. So macroeconomically, these two markets, U.S. and India, are perhaps the most aligned in terms of how they think about entrepreneurship, how they think about the key technologies that can actually change, people's lives. Whether it's in manufacturing or in healthcare or in retail, all of these things.
I didn't hear you talk about payments, because that really is one of the big areas where I think India has leapfrogged ahead,
which is stunningly impressive. I think it is perhaps one of those, epitome of what India can do. I think the India stack by itself is so phenomenal that it can be adopted by any number of countries, including the U.S. And the motion towards, CBDC and, central bank-based digital currency, these are all innovative disruptions that can fundamentally change the financial system that we have to the positive. And I think India is taking a huge leadership position in that, and I think it's remarkable, a country that actually had very low PC penetration, internet penetration, and mobile penetration, to fundamentally be claiming the mobile data usage in India to be ahead of China and the US put together. I mean, that's happened in the last 5 years. That is stunning. Which is one of the reasons why we get excited, because the resilience of the Indian market and the Indian entrepreneur is, the glass half empty kind of an approach that the entrepreneur takes, and nothing is impossible. And if you go down to Palo Alto, people think of creating companies. They're going to be global companies. They may have, two guys and a dog in the garage, but they think that they can actually do that. We see that same approach to the Indian entrepreneur, and that's exciting. As a capital provider, we want people that are betting their lives on a dream and looking for help to get them achieve that dream. And there's nothing better than that to actually feel excited about every day you wake up.
Mike, it's not two guys and a dog. It's much more than that for you and Prellis. But what's the dream?
What's the dream? The dream is that you could make a medicine to every disease you want to, and diseases aren't just one thing. We tend to treat them with one medicine. I liken it to a caveman walking around a broken space shuttle, and he has one wrench, and he can hit it once, or he can turn something once. Maybe you want to turn 50 things, but you're held back because you can only make one drug realistically. Maybe you can make 50 drugs. You can treat everybody the way they need to be treated, and you can do it at a price that actually will allow global access as opposed to just a very small.
Well, the power of individualization as far as therapy is concerned, that could be a significant breakthrough. Marc, what's the dream? And more importantly, is there a 12-month plan, a 3-year plan, a five-year plan?
Yeah, we absolutely have a multi-year plan, but it's all about enabling autonomous mobility, and it's doing that safely and sustainably. So, what we're really looking to do now is to be able to have this processor out that can compute everything in the environment around you, do it very low power to enable electric vehicles, but also to be able to do it at a cost point that really democratizes the safety in these systems to many vehicles. So that's the view for the future.
Well, Marc and Mike, we wish the two of you the very best of luck with your individual companies, as well as the dreams that you chase. Sriram and Nick, always a pleasure. Congratulations on what you've been able to do at Celesta so far, and we wish you the very best of luck with the India Opportunity Fund and, of course, all the big bets that you're hoping to make in India.
Thank you very much.
Well, with that, it is time for us to wrap up this special edition of Young Turks here from the Valley. From all of us here on the team, for now, goodbye and thanks for watching.